This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include Phil Kirk, former Cabinet Secretary, former State Board of Education, political guru. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Doug Raymond, who is a political consultant who hails from the eastern part of North Carolina. Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, and former Secretary of State, former Attorney General Rufus Edmisten. On this show, we're going to talk about Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger's decision not to run for the U.S. Senate nomination. We're going to try to understand why the State Board of Education is postponing the results of last May's statewide test scores, and we'll discuss even more crises in the Department of Health and Human Services. And as always, we're going to end our program by asking our panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get to it. Last week, Doug Raymond accurately predicted that Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger would not run in next May's primary election for the GOP Senate nomination. Now the speculation focuses on whether or not there are going to be any other big-name Republicans to run, and if not, how this is going to impact the overall election. Doug, you called it last week. Now tell us if you see any other big-name Republicans considering in this primary, and if not, why?
Well, there are some considering, and we mentioned the one last week. The big one is Pete Brunstetter in the state Senate. But I think the real thing for people to watch is coming up this coming Monday, and that's going to be when the campaign finance reports close out. Tom Tillis had about $277,000 in his first report. That was considered to be real low, and but of course he was still serving as the speaker, and they kind of gave him a pass. Both in North Carolina and the people I talked to in Washington, they say $1 million is kind of the magic number, and they want to see $1 million in that account. So I think if once that report comes out, if Tom Tillis has $1 million, I think that's going to be considered a show of strength, and maybe some of the people that are considering getting in may back out. If he doesn't, that might be seen as a show of weakness, and some of these people that are considering it may say, hey, I've got a shot here.
I have to ask, Berger said this this is a typical politician response. Rufus, you've run a lot of times. He said this just wasn't the right time for him. Reading between the lines, was he unable to raise the money? Was he not thinking he could win the primary, or didn't he think he could beat Kay Hagan? What was going on, really?
Well, I can be a professional, not the right time. That was 1984 when I got whacked.
But you ran anyway.
Yeah, I ran anyway, but I was pretty well ahead until the last 2 weeks. Well, you know, I remember one time after I was elected Attorney General, I was thinking of running the Senate. So I thought, well, it can't hurt because I get my folks together and I can raise some money. And then, you know, I've never intended to do it. I think a lot of folks don't mind people saying their name because it sounds good. And I don't think any time they had any notion of doing that because it just doesn't make sense unless you're going to get out there and work every day somewhere. It's not like it used to be.
Phil, where does this leave Tom Tillis? Is he now the front runner in this primary?
Well, first, I never thought Berger was going to run. I don't think he had the fire in the belly, and I think he's in a very powerful position and wants to stay there. I think he's more interested in his son being in Congress, possibly, if Howard Coble doesn't run again. But yes, I think it leaves Tillis as the front runner, and I guess you only have to get 40%, if I remember the election law correctly. So I think several conservatives running are going to divide that vote.
The Tea Party is not supporting Tillis, Chris. They say he's too moderate for them. They've got Mark Harris from Charlotte and Greg Bannon, the doctor from Cary, that are running, but nobody really knows these two people. What impact is the Tea Party going to have on this primary?
Well, I don't think it's just the Tea Party. I mean, I think that it's interesting, you know, that one of the reasons I think Senator Berger prolonged his decision was to sort of get at Tom Tillis. It's no secret in town that they do not get along very well, and now he's floated the name of State Senator Pete Brunstetter, I think, just to annoy Tillis further. I mean, they're barely...
Most people don't think Brunstetter's going to
No,
run.
I don't either, although I'll defer to folks who may know better. But I think there's no love lost, and part of this, I think, is just going after Tillis. It's interesting, the Tea Party thinks that Mark Harris is running, the Charlotte minister, to divide the conservative vote to give it to Tillis, and they point to the fact that former state GOP chair Robin Hayes is involved with this campaign, and somebody who used to work on Berger's staff. I actually think Mark Harris is going to make a big splash. I think he will be able to raise some money and make this at least an interesting and competitive race.
There's a lot of speculation that this is likely to be an ugly primary. Rufus, you alluded to this before. Remembering 1984 when we had, what was it, 10 Democrats running in the primary for the gubernatorial election. The party never was able to come back together afterwards. Is it possible that this primary might be so divisive that it just...
I see the makings, Tom. I know that the last day of campaigning, I was still trying to get Eddie Knox's people to vote for me in the Democratic primary. And I would make a prediction that the biggest troublemaker, if you call it that, will be this minister out of Charlotte.
Mark Harris.
Yes, sir.
Doug, you manage candidates, help them raise money and so forth like that. The National Republican Party has said that this is an essential seat for Republicans to win if they stand any chance whatsoever of capturing the U.S. Senate. What influence do you think the National Party is going to have in this election?
Well, I'll allude back to my initial answer. They're sitting there waiting to see. They look at fundraising ability as a signal of strength. And if Tillis has good fundraising, they're going to get involved and they're going to help them. And I've even heard through some people that Karl Rove has said that he thinks that this is going to be the number one. Well, he came down here and did a fundraiser. Yeah, this is going to be the number one race. But Tillis has to show through that campaign report that he can raise the money to be the front runner.
How much money is a candidate going to have to run after they get out of the primary, from start to finish? How much money are they going to have to raise?
Primary?
Well, no, from the beginning to end. How much money is a candidate going to have to run? Is it $12 million?
I'd say a minimum of $10 million, and depending on how contentious the primary is, maybe even $15 million. But I think some people are holding back because they don't think Kay Hagan is going to be as easy to beat as some people.
I was going to say, how vulnerable is Kay Hagan?
I think it'll be a close race, but it's a fascinating dynamic, really, because people who are really mad at the General Assembly and live in gerrymandered districts, as a lot of people do, Tillis is coming from the General Assembly. So there's here's a chance for people all over North Carolina who are mad at the General Assembly to vote against the General Assembly. That's one part. The other Republicans are going to try to make Kay Hagan Obama's best friend, and so it's going to be the consultants, I think, are going to try to turn this into a sort of, who do you like least, President Obama or the North Carolina General Assembly? And that's what that's the baggage that he brings.
Here's my prediction. I'm going to go ahead and do mine early on. This is the Full Employment Act for radio and television stations next year, with all the TV ads that are going to be run by all these support groups in this campaign, because there are going to be millions and millions of dollars spent. You can watch NC Spin anytime you want. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and click on the YouTube button on the right side of the page. We post each week's show on Friday, so you can view us anytime you like. And while there, be sure to sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle. And you can follow us on Twitter, @NCSpinTweets. 4 ways to keep the conversation going: ncspin.com, NCSpin on Facebook, @NCSpinTweets, and Spin Cycle. We look forward to hearing from you. After these messages, we're going to talk about another crisis at DHHS.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Fishing isn't just part of my job, it's my life. It's a part of who I am and how I was raised in eastern North Carolina. It's how I put food on the table for my family. It's hard work, but I love what I do. There's something special about knowing that my long, hard days help feed friends, neighbors, and people in North Carolina. It might not be glamorous, but fishing is my life.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception: keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
Standby. Every week it seems there's yet another major problem at the Department of Health and Human Services. Earlier this week, we learned that Carol Steckel, who had run the Medicaid program in 2 other states and had been hired to reform Medicaid in our state, left after only 8 months on the job, the latest high-ranking official to depart. Her leaving leaves many unanswered questions about the leadership at DHHS and how to proceed with this major program that spends $13 billion a year. Chris, there's no question about the fact DHHS and Medicaid are complex. They serve millions of people across our state, consume a lot of budget. Governor McCrory has repeatedly said, in fact, he said on NC Spin several weeks ago, he backs Secretary Vosh 100%. But with so many high-level people and so much changing going on in that department, people are beginning to ask if she's really the right person to be leading this. And a growing chorus are saying the department's never going to get fixed until she leaves and a new team can be assembled. What's your assessment?
Well, I think one of two things has to happen. She has to leave, or she has to come out and be much more forthright and explain why she's doing things. She did one television interview where she defended the portfolio of a 24-year-old campaign worker who's in charge of policy, even though he has no policy background and majored in English and worked on McCrory's campaign. Also, you didn't mention, since the last time that we've have had NC Spin, we found out that her former chief of staff worked exactly 1 month and got a $37,000 severance package, which made him get $51,000 in 1 month. There's been no explanation. They didn't want to turn over the documents until Sarah Ovaska, actually with NC Policy Watch, reported it. Then they finally, and got it from somebody else, and they finally released it all. They've been stonewalling the media. It's almost like a bunker mentality over there. And that has distracted everybody from their mission. And Secretary Vosh is in charge of that department. She was hired by the governor. The most astounding thing in state government right now is not all the mistakes that are being made, because there are plenty and they're a distraction, is why Governor McCrory won't even acknowledge that there's a problem. I'm not saying that he should fire her. That's his decision. He's got to at least acknowledge there's some problems over there and we have to fix them.
Phil,
and he hasn't said that.
You were secretary of this department. Not once, but twice, if I remember correctly.
Yes, but I'm not interested in doing it a third time. That's going to be your question.
That was my prediction at the end of the show.
Write you off. Here's the question, though, because you have been in administrations coming into office and so forth. Is this just natural attrition that we're seeing here with all these changes in people? Or should we be concerned about these personnel actions?
We have to be, well, first of all, it is a very complex department, as everybody recognizes. There are a lot of professionals there that are apolitical, in my opinion, and they don't feel real good right now. But with personnel, some of the ones that have been brought in by this administration have left. So you've got two sets of personnel, personnel issues. So, but she only has to please one person, and that's the governor. And the governor's very loyal to people that he brings in, and I don't see any change happening in the foreseeable future.
Doug Steckel came to North Carolina to institute managed care into the Medicaid system. Is she leaving because she saw this wasn't going to happen? We understand there was a lot of friction between her and Secretary Vosh. What do you know about why she left?
Well, once again, I'm not there to know that. I've heard those same things. But the other thing is, if you look at the company that's hired her, she was making $221,000 a year here. So you know they had to pay her a pretty penny to leave. They want to get involved in that business in North Carolina. So obviously there's some thought that, okay, we've got somebody here who has an inside route, but I'd say it's just the opposite. If DHHS has anything to do with that company when she's there, it's another scandal. So they might have just spent a lot of money on somebody for some insider access that they're just not going to get.
Rufus, you've been around state government for a long time. When an agency or an administration has a crisis in confidence, and that's essentially, I think, what's going on here right now, it's very hard to get it back. What's it going to take for Governor McCrory and Secretary Vosh or whoever to restore the confidence in this agency?
Well, first of all, as my friend Phil Kirk knows, I began dealing with Health and Human Services in 1974, and I served under 2 Republican administrations. I think 3
That's not my question.
All right, I'll go on with it.
Well, let's get on with it then.
But I want to tell you, what do they have to do is one thing, like I heard a wise sage one time named Tom Campbell say, they need to quit concentrating on Aldola Voss as a personality. And I've seen a lot of hurtful things written about her, and especially some lady went into her personal life. The press needs to stop that sort of stuff. And secondly, they need to have a come to Jesus talk and bring out Secretary Voss and say everything that you're asked, give an answer to it. And stop, it goes back to Watergate. I give lecture after lecture about Watergate. Everybody that gets in trouble does not tell the story up front and say, here's our problem.
And it's ultimately going to come out.
And you've got to look at it this way, too. that department only functions well if you have communication within the department.
But Tom, you mentioned in your question to Rufus that there's a crisis of confidence, HHS, and everybody knows it. Well, the governor has not acknowledged it, and that's one of the points. And the second thing about Carol Steckel leaving is, regardless, I'm not a fan of changing our Medicaid system to an out-of-state for-profit managed care company. We debated that on the show, and we will again. But she was one of the few people in the department that had a resume, that was qualified, that had run Medicaid programs, that was well-respected as a professional in the job. She didn't leave just to make a lot of money. She was here to help transition and have the governor's Medicaid privatization program go forward. Well, so she left prematurely because she didn't like where she was working, and there's big problems with that department, and that's what we need to fix.
So where does this leave us with Medicaid? Because a lot of the institutional knowledge and experience with Medicaid has already departed this department. Where are we now?
Well, the key is who they find to take her place, and I think it's going to be very difficult to find a top-flight person to come into the department, not just because of what's going on, but because it is a complex issue, and there is a tight time frame for getting a lot of stuff done.
And it's under the microscope like no other department in the state. You really, you know what you're getting into with that.
Let me suggest that there's a good appointment over there. His name is Mark Payne. I've known him for years. He's a 25-year veteran of healthcare financing. He's the new chief of staff, and that may be a very bright spot.
Chris, final question. Short answer. Is this the making or the undoing of the McCrory administration?
It is. It's not helping, and I think his response is as important to his future as actually what's happening over there. If he would acknowledge it and say there's problems and we're going to fix it instead of just denying everything, that's what's going to actually take him down further.
After these messages, we're going to talk about why we haven't released the test scores.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Are you a woman who invests a lot of time and energy in your family and career? Wouldn't you love a day just for you? Join us Friday, October 18th at the beautiful Raffaldini Vineyards and Winery for the FabU Academy Fall Women's Retreat. For registration and more details, visit 40plusandfab.com/retreat.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
NCAnimalAg.com.
The North Carolina Medical Society is committed to a healthier North Carolina. We feel as an organization representing over 14,000 physicians that we have a responsibility and an obligation to help our citizens become more healthy. And by doing this, we want to help educate them about ways in which they need to keep themselves healthy through good nutrition, exercise, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. These ingredients will help not only individual citizens become and maintain a healthier outlook on their lives, but also help contribute to having a healthier state.
We now return to NC Spin.
The State Board of Education is trying to figure out how to handle the problem of intergrade test scores from last year. Because of higher standards on the test, board members were told the scores were noticeably lower from the year before and decided to call last year a transition year. May even release those scores using the old standards and the new standards. Phil, you were chairman of the State Board of Education for a lot of years. Have you ever known a decision like this to be made? What does it mean?
Well, we made a decision 8 or 10 years ago when we changed the test, and we set the cut scores or the passing scores, proficiency scores, whatever you want, too fast, and then we had to backtrack. The new state board, and most of the members are new, not all of them, but over half, are new, and they haven't had any experience on setting the score. So they announced nearly a year ago, before the new administration came in with the new board members, that it would be October of this year before the scores would be announced. But now,
so why is everybody making such a big deal of the fact they haven't released them?
I don't know, because they haven't set the cut scores. They're going to do that at the October meeting, and they'll be released in November. They've been planning all along for a delay, but they've only, as I'm told, I checked with Chairman Covey, and he said that they were definitely going to release them in November. It'd been planned to delay them.
They sure hadn't said that in the media. Chris, if I'm a parent in North Carolina, and I'm hearing all this press about the fact that these scores were noticeably lower than last year, What am I supposed to think about my education system?
Well, I think you're supposed to be a little confused, and at the very least, they didn't do a very good job communicating what their plan was. But all these scores and the obsession with how every year does, I think, is we've gotten almost as if it's we're watching American Idol or something with our test scores. We have to have this has to be over a period of time, and the best scores are the NAEP scores, where actually North Carolina schools are doing relatively well, not nearly well enough when you compare them to other states.
Well, I'm getting ready to say 37% of our 8th graders are proficient in math, 31% proficient in reading, and 30% in science.
And that is roughly the national average, better than national average in math, and roughly the national average in the other scores. So the problem is not
child
public education.
To be below 30 or a part of the group that's not scoring so high.
Well, I thought the department, not the delay, but the test scores themselves, I thought the department and the state board had been talking for months and had prepared us for the scores to be lower. So I think they ought to go ahead and release them.
Well, exactly.
But they will in about another month.
Doug, so far as it goes, a lot of people are saying that the fault that we're having with these test scores is because of the Common Core curriculum, and that the tests are considerably more intensive and difficult than what we've had. And Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest and others are saying that's exactly the reason why we should get rid of the Common Core curriculum. What do you think?
Yeah, that may be, but I think the overall trouble here, and this has been for years, I'm not a big proponent of testing these kids to death, but if that's the way we're going to do it and that's the way we're going to judge it, I don't think it's right that the people that are going to be held accountable get to release the test scores and curve them than they want and say, oh, well, we're having a bad year and we'll institute it next year. There's no accountability when you get to be the person who decides when you release the scores, whether you... And
Rufus, the Chamber of Commerce has come out saying they favor keeping this Common Core curriculum. That they need students who are better educated. They need more intensive and more rigorous education. You're a former teacher. You agree with that?
Well, if my friend, the other former teacher here, agrees, I would.
I agree. We need to keep.
I didn't ask what Phil
thought. I think we're still so obsessed, as Doug says, with this testing business. I've said this on NC Spin 100 times.
Well, we got to know how our kids are doing, don't we?
Well, we've never said that we're going to do something and keep it over and over again.
Yeah.
And the trouble about having all these armchair pundits is they've never sat in a teacher's chair. And they don't know how a teacher operates.
It's interesting that Phil said he supports Common Core. A lot of people do, a lot of business community people do, but a lot of people on the right of the Republican Party do not, including Dan Forrest. This is a big issue inside the Republican Party. It's going to be a divisive issue, I think.
Let's give Governor McCrory a little bit of credit. He came out strongly for Common Core, and I thought that was a wise decision.
And is still supporting it.
Of course. Yeah. And most leading business people are for Common Core because it's rigorous.
All right, after these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. That should be interesting.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
You trust your family physician to care for you and your family. We treasure that trust and are committed to providing the best care possible for all North Carolinians. It's time for Medicaid reform, but not without input from North Carolina's family physicians. Medicaid reform will impact health care for all of us. Tell state leaders you want your physician involved. We need Medicaid reform that's good for North Carolina. To sign our petition of support, visit rnchealthcare.com.
North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch A Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthiernc.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
This has become my favorite part of the show. We ask our panelists to tell us something that we don't know. Even I don't know what they're going to say. Rufus, we're going to start with you. Tell us something we don't know.
Well, I will make a prediction that Senator Kay Hagan is going to run against the North Carolina General Assembly and that she will raise significantly more money than the Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate.
Good. Chris?
In light of all the scandals that we've seen at HHS and all the frustration, I can tell you that folks inside the McCrory camp are much more worried than they're saying publicly. They feel like they're under siege and they're very worried. And one way you can tell that is that there are now rumblings around town that other Republicans are even wondering trying to position themselves to make sure they're available and around if things are still this bad in a year or two when McCrory's thinking about re-election.
Available, you say?
Absolutely.
Phil Kirk.
Governor McCrory is going to make recruitment and retention of teachers and better pay a high priority, probably the centerpiece of his education program, but he's going to have a different model, and it's not going to be based on longevity and degrees. It's going to be based more on performance, and there's still a question mark about master's degree pay.
So is he going to propose a pay hike in May for the May
I don't know the
legislature?
answer to that.
All right. Doug, tell us something we don't know.
I'll end where we began. I predict that Tom Tillis's campaign report is going to show over $1 million. I predict that he's going to announce that long before it's officially turned in to try to get some folks out. We'll probably have that announcement the middle or end of next week in hopes of getting rid of some possible challengers. And another one, 3rd District Congressman Walter B. Jones Jr. Is going to have an opponent announced probably within the next 10 days who has some very strong connections to Washington, D.C. and some pretty strong conservative credentials.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. Stay informed all during the week. Give your opinion and read our weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, and catch NC Spin on Facebook. We hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.